foster friends and family. This is Charles, and you're listening to the Foster Dad Directive podcast, where we explore the foster care system and my experience with it. In this episode, we'll actually be talking about grief and the loss of a relative, a pet. During fostering, I actually lost my grandpa back on November 15th, shortly after Veterans Day, and that's when the toddler ended up leaving, because Toddler actually left on Veterans Day to live with family. Plus, I had to put down 2 dogs in 2023, and Cassie's lost multiple relatives as well. So loss, even for just parenting in general and trying to deal with a loss is just a hard thing to do no matter what situation you're in. One of my first memories was actually my dad crying because he had lost his dad, and I think maybe 10. I barely remember it, but it was one of the first and only times I had seen him cry. So it's not even a new thing that it's hard. It's one of those incidents where you are taking a huge loss in your life on top of trying to keep another little human being alive. So I wanted to go over this just to learn some stuff for myself, plus also go over this topic in general. I believe it's a very important one. But as always, please know that I'm not a trained professional. The views expressed on this podcast are those of the host, and in the future other hosts or guests, and do not constitute professional advice unless otherwise stated by said guest. Please ensure you seek adequate and effective legal counsel to best protect yourself in this ever-changing system, especially outside of the state of Michigan. And for updates, I really don't have any updates on our going-ons. We might have respite of 2 younger kids. They are potentially changing from another foster home. From my understanding, one of them threatened to jab their dog with a pencil. Having 3 dogs and a cat, for the age of the child being under teenage, I'm not too worried about it. The kid that we had that actually left, who was the older sibling to the toddler, had once threatened to, kick the dogs or something, and we talked to him about it and explained why that was unacceptable. And from what we were told, it was kind of in an emotional event, so I don't believe the child had any ill intention. I think they had the pencil in their hand and just that was the only thing their brain could put together during a very emotional time. I've set up the upstairs to where I know that the cat is safe. He can end up going into my spare room up there where I put a nice little cat door on it. So he has his own little safe haven now. I've made sure of that. But honestly, I don't foresee it being something where it was completely malicious. The teen that we had that did hurt Ralphie didn't talk about it. There weren't really any signs of it. Wasn't emotional. It was while Cassie was sleeping and I was at work. So I honestly think it was big emotions, especially if these kids have just come into care. We dealt with it with the kid, and he didn't mean any bad intent from what I could gather, and once we talked to it, we never had another incident, honestly. So I believe if anything, it might be that there's high emotions, especially if they just came into care, and it's more than likely something that can be talked about, and moving both children just for saying it, is not really the best move for the foster parents, in my opinion. I get that they have pets. If we had bounced the kid we had for threatening to kick the dog or whatever, he threatened something for the dogs, but if we had done that, I don't believe it would have been in his best interest. He would have been separated from his brother, or we would have lost him and his brother and missed out on those connections and all the memories that we have and that we gave him. So I don't believe that the kids have any ill intent, but on my next episode, I definitely will update everything and make sure we see how that goes. And other than that, it was like I said in the start, the toddler left on Veterans Day, which was November 11th, and then my grandpa passed away on the 15th, which was the same week. So Veterans Day was one of my holidays I actually liked, and now kind of sucks. So there's that, but it honestly could always be worse. And in terms of parenting through grief, I actually went off an article from Psychology Today, along with looking at a few different sites, and they all kind of hinted at the same thing of making sure you take time for yourself. I actually went through some Reddit pages as well and found one about a person who ended up losing their spouse while having young children. And so how you grieve is going to be different based on what the circumstances are. with that one, that person is now parenting on their own. I honestly couldn't even imagine going from having a spouse to having children and dealing with all the things that come with the loss of somebody, funeral and cremation expenses, the funeral or celebration of life, bills, hopefully life insurance if you have it, the loss of like a second income if you don't, and just the absolute tragedy outside of like losing someone you care about. And then, like, my incident where it is my grandpa. We haven't gotten to see each other as much as I would like the last few years. But it's been the first major loss since my great-grandma passed away in about 2011. So I'll consider myself pretty lucky as of right now. And my wife has actually lost one of her uncles, which was a kind of a chaotic fellow. And then also, like, her great aunt. And that she took pretty hard. And we were dealing with fostering during all of this loss, honestly, and like I said, in 2023, I actually had to make the hard decision to put two of my dogs down due to Perseus's muscles were starting to give out on him, so he was becoming temperamental, I guess, just because of the pain he was in. I can't even imagine. His muscles were going and there was nothing they could do, and Jade ended up having cancer in like all of her body, so she went into shock and her muscles started shutting down. So unfortunately I had to make the hard decision to actually put both of them down, and it was the first time I've had to do that. I mean, when you lose a relative, you may not always see it's coming. My grandpa had a stroke a while back, but I kind of saw it coming in a way, just the way he was doing pretty rough. And I know that's bad to say, but like my dogs I didn't really see coming. They just kind of declined rather quickly. And then the difference was I had to make the choice for my dogs, which I know sounds kind of stupid, but I had to be the one to sign the paperwork and choose like to do the end of life stuff. And it was just super hard for me. And we were dealing with the first foster we had who was a chronic runaway. We also had to take care of the kid we were looking to adopt and try to keep all of that going while dealing with all the chaos of making those decisions, plus the paperwork, plus taking them to the vet to have it done, plus gathering remains. And when it came to family, it was going to funerals and celebration of lives and trying to deal with the loss of a family member and just kind of reeling from all of that while trying to parent, which is such a hard thing to balance because you're trying to gather your own emotions, plus explain to a child kind of why you're upset, but without trying to bring like the mood down, because for a lot of them, I didn't really explain for the older teens, they knew what was going on, so it was essentially them seeing what was going on. And for the one kid who was running away, she took it pretty hard, but then decided to run away as well, so was also putting more strain on both herself and us. So we were trying to deal with that on top of everything else. In which the article I was for Psychology Today talks a lot about like communicating openly and honestly. That really depends on the age of the kid, to be honest, because the two youngest kids we have, I never would have talked to him about that. That's just something that would have been beneficial to have a therapist if they had been here during that time. Thankfully they weren't, so they didn't have to go through that. I mean, putting my dogs down was super hard. There were days where I'd go to work and, have a little cry in my truck before going into the building. And then thankfully I worked like second and third shift, like some weird flex thing where, most of the time people were gone, so I could actually have some time alone and kind of, if I got a tearful moment, I was able to be alone and could kind of pull myself together before leaving the building or going somewhere else. But the older kids, they kind of knew what was going on. For the one who ran away constantly, she was super attached to Perseus, so it kind of fueled it, but also she had been running away long before then, so honestly it put more of a strain on like me. I had to make that hard decision and then have a kid who, and I tried to be like open-minded and considerate, but then you run away and then complain about how much you cared about him, but you were running away before he passed away. And so I was like, I also had to make the decision. You had the chance to stay here with him and hang out with him all day while I was at work, and you chose to run away instead. So that was definitely a hard one to navigate. Honestly, could I have handled it better? Yes, but at that point, she had already run away about 7 times, so it was getting towards the end where we couldn't go through it anymore. I think we went through 9 times of her running away before we had to choose to focus on everything else, because Jade had a stroke shortly before that, plus we had another kid Plus, I just put Percy down. It's like, we can't keep dealing with this. It was such a hard thing to navigate. Honestly, my best advice is just to kind of do therapy. Therapy was definitely a big one where I was doing therapy at the time and being open and honest about that, and how I talked to my therapist about not really having emotions when my great-grandma Pauline passed in 2011, and just trying to get those emotions to come through and trying to navigate them properly without going one way or the other. I didn't want to go like into a deep depression or the opposite way and go deep into anger. I wanted to do it properly. So my number one suggestion is therapy. I know the stigma, and I want to do an episode on that too, the stigma against men in therapy. You don't have to start bawling while you're in therapy. I've used therapy a lot of the time just to bounce ideas off from my therapist, especially when I was doing virtual. I bounced ideas off him a lot. Honestly, the only reason I'm not with that therapist anymore is because he seemed preoccupied and on his computer or phone a lot of the time. So I honestly just found it was almost like a feeling of being a burden to him with the way he was on his phone and stuff. So I did drop it, and then I want to do EMDR therapy, which I think would be beneficial. But my insurance is probably changing next year, so I'm going to wait and try to find something, hopefully with Veterans Affairs, which also does roll into number 2 on Psychology Today, which I didn't say it earlier. You'd actually probably have to go to the website to find out the person's name. It's Calvina Ellerby, PhD, and the title is How to Parent Through Grief. And she goes over how she lost a sibling at about 13 and the things she went through, and I think this article is also pretty amazing on going through the parenting aspect of it, which number 2 is take time to remember. That was one thing I was working on a lot with Percy, and I mean, that one, do you fully remember everything you did with a dog? Not usually. Like, I can't really say too many things. I can think of the things he did a lot, like laying on me. Like, if I was laying on the couch, he'd crawl in between my legs and lay on me, lay on my entire body, pin my torso down and lick my face. So I took time to remember him, but I also didn't want to sink into the depression of getting stuck in that rut of remembering him too much. And with my great grandpa, I think about him a lot. Especially there was a story of him duct taping my diaper on because he didn't fully know how to change a diaper. There were stories about him feeding me dog treats. We used to actually drive the tractor down to Boone's store, and he would sit in the back in the pull-behind trailer and drink beers, and we'd drive down to Boone's store and then get candy and stuff and then drive back. And even one time in home ec, I made him an apron, which for the longest time he still had, and I remember him wearing a few times. So I've been trying to make sure that, I give those people that time. I think about my great-grandma all the time, even now, and it's been 14 years, and, she'd make those, Stouffer's baked macaroni and cheese containers, and she'd sprinkle more cheese on top. I think about that all the time, having, donuts and coffee with her in the morning. So I think taking time to remember is a huge one as well, just because my foster kids may not know them or know all these things about them, but it's important for you as an individual to take that time to remember them, because if you try to push it too far away and go through the stages of grief, then you will also have so much resentment and trying to fight going through all this and coming through acceptance. I looked at the stages of grief, and I think I don't think I'll do it right now. I think I'll dedicate a whole episode to it, because I think I did go through the stages, especially for the baby leaving, not so much for my grandpa, because there was no bargaining. I kind of come to terms with it. So I think I'll do a full episode on the stages of grief, just because I think they're super important and deserve their own little episode, even if it's not very long. Maybe it's a little sub episode that I can put out midweek. Unfortunately, they've been very chaotic for getting things out just because of, work, fostering, family stuff. So especially with the holidays, I'm trying to get into it. I think I've been doing a lot better. This episode is actually for next week's. I'm getting this week's, which was late, up today. So it's just a lot between the editing, plus putting the intro and outro music in, plus making the video for YouTube. It just takes a little bit more time. And sometimes between, my sleep schedule and chores and parenting and everything else, it does honestly take a bit of a toll on your energy and mental health. So if you're parenting, don't feel like you're failing. Honestly, no matter how hard or easy it is, if you're tired, just remember, if you're tired and today was easy, yesterday probably wasn't easy. You're probably exhausted from yesterday. Because I used to be so mad at myself sometimes for what I thought was oversleeping, but then I'd look back at my schedule and I'd see I slept for 4 hours a day, 5 days a week. And then, zonked out and slept for 12 hours on the weekend. And I know I've heard the rumors you can't catch up on sleep, but I think if you drag your body that much for that long, it definitely does take its toll on you, which goes into that self-care I was talking about from last week, which is why I've been trying to focus a little bit more on self-care and trying to make sure I get adequate sleep, especially now that I don't have all the commitments that I had at the time, like school transportation and stuff. And on to number 3, seek out safe spaces to address grief. I mean, I know I said up top that I would actually cry in my truck before work, and I'm not kidding about that in the least. I'm not ashamed of it or anything. It was hard. I was dealing with the loss of my first pet that I had to do myself. I was seeking therapy. I kind of wish I had sought out more. I did end up joining the Legion, American Legion there shortly after, kind of to gain other things to do and kind of keep myself busy. I did actually, before joining the Legion, start fostering through a local animal rescue, so I was able to help dogs and stuff, which was nice, but it was also mostly Saturdays, which was a ton of stuff that just added to my plate, and I was working so much Monday to Friday, and then having events on Saturday with the rescue, along with sometimes having events because I was a head custodian for a school district on the weekends, so it was insanely hard. So I definitely, that's one thing to do while grieving, is don't hit that other end of the spectrum where you over encumber yourself with things to do in an attempt to not hit that depression and not doing anything. You gotta walk a fine line, and I mean, I'll tell you, it's hard, especially with parenting. It's really hard. So make sure you look after yourself and take inventory. If you're exhausted all the time and reaching out and not reaching out to the right people and putting too much on your plate, take time and address that stuff and pull some of that stuff back so that you can take the time to seek out other avenues where you can address your grief, such as therapy, group counseling, support groups, hanging time with friends. I mean, there was a lot of time where I didn't even see my friends. Sometimes even the friend I live with, I didn't get to spend much time with him. And so make sure you take that time to do that, because in the end, it's beneficial for you. As one of my best friends say, you can't recharge somebody else's battery if your battery's dead. So if your battery is completely drained, you can't be there to help somebody else. And finally, number 4 is reassure children. That is a very important one, especially when you're fostering, just because they've been through so much. Honestly, we did our best to kind of reassure them for the pets and stuff. I mean, it was a big change for them. The 18-year-old did get mad because I ended up going to get my dog Canoe. I had to whisper his name because he would probably run in here and try to jump in my lap. But honestly, getting him during that time probably helped pull me out of my funk, because I was pretty devastated just having to make that choice and losing, one of my best friends that I had essentially since 2013. So I had him for 10 years. And when I was working at the prison and stuff and working constantly and had no one else, I got to come home to him and Jade, and then I lost both of them within 60 days of each other. And it just was devastating. I mean, at the time I hadn't lost Jade, but she had her stroke, so I got Canoe, and it was probably one of the best things of my life. And we tried to reassure the kids about that. And then she just ended up, the 18-year-old just got mad and said we were trying to replace Perseus, which was farthest from that. And in the event of my my grandpa, I haven't even told the kid that's with us. It's not something he needs. He's dealt with enough. It's not too much of a thing where he didn't know him, so I just don't see any benefit in putting that kind of sadness on a kid, especially when he's got so much else going on in life. He's a teenager in high school. You should worry about, the wonky things that teenagers think about. But I did find this article extremely helpful, especially to think about the different things I've been kind of slacking on and not doing, especially because you want to go through all of this healthily. I guess some reason that word sounds wrong, but you want to make sure you do it properly so that you're doing it in a healthy manner. So, you're not in a year from now just bawling your eyes out or punching a wall because you haven't processed those emotions. You want to make sure And while you don't forget them, like I'll never forget my great grandma. I have a bunch of pictures of her on my wall. I have my great grandpa's Vietnam picture on my desk next to me. So I take that time to kind of like grieve them and properly do it, because I don't want them coming up in that manner. I don't want to be angry about when I come to think of them. I already have enough regrets with some of the things that happened. So take time for yourself. If anything, do stuff with your kids. Make sure you let them know that they're loved and that things are going to be good, because it probably could be rubbing off on them. I would say there's a big chance it is, and that you want to make sure that they know they're loved while also taking out time. And, if you put off, I don't know, picking up your shoes today and do it tomorrow, don't feel bad about yourself and then dive into a depression and not do them for a month. Just give yourself some slack. If you load the dishwasher but you don't have the energy to run it right away and you decide to take an hour, or if you play video games for an extra hour and say don't put up a picture frame or something, don't be hard on yourself. I did that for a long time, especially while fostering, and it just led to me being like confrontational with everybody in the house and just being like a jerk when I shouldn't have been. And it's just one of those things where you just want to take care of your mental health and make sure you're getting through all of it okay. So if you've lost somebody lately, just know, they say it gets easier. There are days on and off, but just know if you have any regrets, there's nothing you can change. Make sure you cherish the good times you had with them and focus on those. Don't let it draw you into like a depression or like substance abuse, and make sure you take it easy on yourself. We all deal with loss, but it varies on how hard it is based on your relationship with that person and the time and what else you're going through, especially since we live in probably one of the most stressful times, because while in the medieval times it was pretty bad, we also see every bit of bad constantly nowadays. So take it easy on yourself. Know that you are loved. Your life matters. There's always tomorrow to, do your laundry or fold your laundry. So I just want to thank you all so much for listening. Please like, subscribe, and share. If you want to share your loss, how you've dealt with parenting, even just, I don't know, your life through parenting, I'd love to hear about it. I always use different things. I did read through that book related to the reset method. I don't have the thing on me right now, but I did email Dr. Becky Owens back, and hopefully we'll have her on soon. But I found that book super helpful. So if you have books you want to recommend, I'll do a podcast about that book and all the things I thought were absolutely wonderful about it. Just email me at fosterdaddirective@gmail.com. Also, if you have any feedback, ideas, stories, anything like that, I hope you have a wonderful rest of your week. And may your kids' chaos be funny after 5 minutes and not 5 years. Have a wonderful day. Bye.